Welcome to a tutorial video on C++. In this video I'm going to talk about arrays. In programming terminology, an array is a collection of data. In the previous video when we talked about variables and data types, we were dealing with single values. We could have large values if we're using something like a long double, or smaller values for an integer or floating point, sometimes called a decimal value. But if we want to group data together, group a bunch of values together, we do that through using arrays. We think of it as a group of data, a set of data, or a collection of data. So we have this collection of data, and we define them, come down here on line 10, through dealing with its type first. Remember, C++ is a strongly typed programming language. We care about the data type, so we always need to know what the data type is. And that's the very first keyword on line 10, an int. For an integer array, we're saying, hey, this is a collection of data. All of this data is going to be integers. After that, we have the name of the variable. As a review, variables can contain letters, numbers, or the underscore, but they can't contain spaces and they can't contain other special characters. So we're following the same rules we established in the previous video. We have a type of data, an integer, and a name of a variable. The next thing is where things get a little bit different. Right here we have an opening and closing square brackets around a number. This number is the length of the array. That is, it describes how many entries are possible in this array. As I talked about in the previous video, C++ cares about space. It is a system-level programming language, and so we need to know how many things are going to be in here, because that's going to dictate how much space the entire array is going to take up in memory. So we need to tell it, hey, how big is this? It has 6 things. So moving after that, we see an operator, the equal sign. As I discussed in the previous video, this is assignment. We're putting data into a bucket, putting a value into a variable. So after that, we see the set of data defined as an opening and closing curly brackets. And we see 6 entries separated by commas. This is the data we're putting into the array. So we started with the type of data, integers, the name of the variable, how many in opening and closing square brackets, a total of 6. The equal sign, because we are putting data into the bucket, we're putting values into a variable, and what data are we dealing with? Over here on the right hand side, this set of data. The values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 6 entries total. Well, we can also define an array using other data types. We can have integers arrays, or we can have floating point arrays, sometimes called decimal values. We see that on line 13. Again, in that same pattern, starting with the data type, float, the name of the variable, following the rules of letters, numbers, or the underscore, but no other special characters, and definitely no spaces. Then we have the length of the array, 3 in this case, and then we have the 3 entries in this array, 0.5, 6.5, and 8.8. Defined in opening and closing curly brackets. So we have data type, name of variable, size of the array, data for the array. Well, now that I've gone over all these rules, we're going to break some. Character arrays are where things get a little bit weird in C++. In previous versions of C++, much earlier versions, it followed the same rules. We had to be very careful about how much space character arrays take up. Those rules have relaxed a bit for some more technical and complex reasons I'm not going to get into here. But we just need to know, right now, that character arrays are weirder. That is, they don't have a fixed length. And so we don't define a length, but we use the same syntax, the same patterns of letters and characters and things as we're writing code to define a character array. We just don't give it a fixed length if we don't need to. So here we see this is a character array, data type's the first, name of the variable, and an opening and closing bracket, which says, hey, this is an array, the data inside this array are characters. We see the equal sign, we're putting data into a bucket, we're putting values into a variable. Then we see right here, the data we're dealing with is a collection of characters, starting with the beginning quotations to the ending quotations. Now I mentioned in the first video that characters are defined with a single quote around them. Well, we can actually do this as defining a character array using a double quote. And so we see a collection of characters in this array. Again, character arrays are a little weird compared with other data types. But let's move on. So I've described how we can put different data into arrays. We always have the data type first, an integer or float, a double, a long double, characters, booleans, whatever. The data type's always first. We have the name of the variable. We have the size of the array, except for character arrays, which are weird. And we have the data we're putting into it if we're working through that. Well, we can also put arrays inside of arrays. These are known as multidimensional arrays. The reason they're called that is because if we think of a string of data, we can think of it as a single dimension. It is describing some set of data. But if we have data that contains other data, it suddenly becomes multidimensional. That is, it has other dimensions to it. And so arrays within arrays, which are completely allowable within C++, are known as multidimensional arrays. And they work through the same syntax we've established previously. We have the type of data, in this case an integer, name of the variable, again can have letters, numbers, or the underscore, but no spaces or other special characters. And then we say, okay, how many entries are in this? Well, 3, okay. Because this is multidimensional, we now have to say, okay, this is going to be an array that contains arrays. So it has 3 entries. Each entry contains, moving over to the next set of square, open and close square brackets, 2. And we see that over here on the right-hand side. We see 1, 2, 3 entries. Each entry has 1, 2. So it has 3 entries. Each entry has 2 of these. It is now multidimensional. It is an array that contains itself more arrays. So I've described all these rules for creating arrays. We have the type of data it's going to contain, we have the name of a variable, we have the length of the array, and then we have the data we're putting into this. In the case of multidimensional arrays, we're putting arrays inside of arrays. Okay, how in the world do we access this data? Well, I mentioned at the top of this video that arrays are ordered data. That is, the position of the data is important. So we access this data by using its index, or its position. So we need to know the position the data is in order to access it. We do that through using its position relative to the beginning. That is, the first entry is 0, the next entry is 1, next entry for that is 2, and onwards until we get to the end or the length of the array. So we start at 0 and move upwards. And that's how we access data within the array. So we think about it as a little bit like a bookshelf. Except we can't see the bookshelf facing us. We're looking at it sort of long ways. We're saying, okay, I want book 3, or I want book 4, or I want book 0, and then we get that book out. So we're looking at a collection of data where we're not viewing the collection as separate entries, but viewing the collection as a whole by itself. So as I mentioned, we're putting data into a variable, putting values into a variable, data into the bucket. But we're not necessarily thinking of data within the bucket. We're thinking of the subsections within that bucket. So we're saying, okay, I want subsection 0, or I want subsection 1, subsection 2. So let's scroll all the way down and look at that. Let's start on line 26. We see, okay, here, second positions. Well, I mentioned arrays start with 0. So that's not technically the second position. It is the third value. So let's look at these in turn. So number array, 2. Scroll up to number array, 0, 1, 2 would be 3, the integer value 3. Scroll down here, decimal array 2, decimal array 0, 1, 2 would be 8.8. Scroll down here to string array 2, 0, 1, 2. So we've got 3, 8.8, and the character L so far. Come down here, multi-dimensional array, so this supply multi-indexes, multi-positions to figure that out. We say, okay, in this variable, I want position 2 and then position 0. 0, 1, 2, 0 is 5. So we've got 3, 8.8, L, and 5. I'm going to run this so we can see those values. 3, 8.8, L, and 5. So we access positions, the indexes, in part of inside the array by supplying its position or index in opening and closing square brackets at the end of the variable. Again, thinking at it as a collection by itself. So we're not viewing entries inside the collection, we're just saying, hey collection, I want number 2, or I want position 0. Give me that data. In the case of multidimensional arrays, we say, okay, I want entry 2, and within entry 2, I want entry 0. As we saw right here on line 29. So let's review all of this one more time. We create arrays within C++ by defining its data type. C++ is a strongly typed programming language, so we always care about the data type. So right here we have integers, we have the name of the variable. A variable is a collection of letters, numbers, or the underscore, but excluding special characters and excluding spaces. When we create an array, we say how many entries are in that array using open and closing square brackets. In this case, on line 10, 6. And then with the equal sign means we're putting data into the bucket, putting value into the array. Or putting value into a variable, in this case an array. In this case we have 6 entries. We have a length of 6, that meets perfectly. Down here we can do the same with other data types of float, 3, 3. We reviewed how character arrays are a little weird, where they don't have a fixed length, or they can get away with not having a fixed length, and we can put data into that. We also saw multidimensional arrays, where we can put arrays into arrays, and when we define them, we define how big the length of each array within each position is. In this case, it has 3 entries. Each entry has itself 2 entries. Finally, I talked about how we can access the data by using its position or its index relative to the beginning. Again, I talked about the metaphor of the bookshelf. We're not looking at books on the shelf, we're looking at a shelf. We're saying, hey, I want book 0, or I want book 3, or I want book 4, and taking that book out, or looking at that entry. So we can't view individual entries, but we can view the collection as a whole, and then go through them by looking at their index, or the position starting with 0. Thanks for watching.